Yeah, so this is my first time in Oklahoma. I'm actually really excited. I wish I had more time. I was going to spend like half a day tomorrow just driving around, but I have to get back for work, as it always goes. But I got to drive from Oklahoma City, and I saw the coolest sign I've ever seen, probably in all my road trips in my entire life, the one that's boots and barbecue. I just thought, it just doesn't get better than that. It is so fantastic. But the landscape too. Oh, is it getting too much feedback? You let me know. The landscape too. Right as I turned in on the exit, 174, the exit, the landscape starts to open up. Does it keep opening up if you go up? Keep going north.
It varies. When you go north, there's not much trees and
Yeah.
it's like wide open prairie.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Really, really gorgeous. I didn't know it was as forested as it is.
It varies.
It varies. Yeah, yeah. That's when you do a road trip. Yeah. What's that? Huh. That's fascinating. That's really, really interesting. Hey, so I have to tell you a story as I get going here. Back to the Wieden Kennedy project. So I went to University of Oregon, traveled around, worked a little bit in Europe and all over, and then went to Columbia University. Came back to Oregon because it's where I'm from, and started my office there. And basically doing house remodels and little projects and competitions. And I think we got close a couple times. We even got a PA award for something, that was unbilled. Anyway, I was down to 2 employees. Basically, let's see, I was 40 years old. I was making $18,000 a year. And I had done this bar called Saucebox. I met a guy, became friends. We designed the bar. We designed the bar for $2,000 and $2,000 in bar tab. To start your office, think about that. Your significant other might not be so happy when you barter away your services for liquor, but it all comes back. So here's the story. So anyway, did that little bar, became like the coolest spot, where the young folks, this was a while ago, would hang out. And one of the partners of this very, very well-known ad agency that did all Nike's work, everything, they would all go to the bar and drink, and they finally said they were going to do a new headquarters. And they asked the bartender, this place is kind of cool, who did it? So I got a phone call from Wieden Kennedy to show them my work from designing that little bar for $2,000 in bar tab. And then I got a $30 million project. I had 2 employees. I had to lie and say I had 5. I got students to come in. And it was down to an office in Portland, still there, called Bora. They had 150 employees. I had my fake 5. And I got that project, and that's essentially what started my career. But architecture for booze, just remember that. It's how it all begins. Okay, so I'll start. Bunch of stuff to talk about. I'll talk about the reason I do work, what drives the work, what I find most engaging in the possibilities of architecture. I'll show some recent and very new projects. But I'll start with just what matters to me. And I think for me the goal is to create the most acutely specific architecture I can possibly do. In other words, each one of my projects is different. It's a new exploration. It's a new endeavor. I show these sort of photo images of marks. A stone moved forward by the wind. This Native American bridge, which I've never found the provenance for, but an artist sent me this photograph. It's one of my favorite constructions I've ever seen. I mean, if you just think of the trial and error, pushing those logs out there and roping them and pushing them out and roping them and pushing. I mean, it's the most extraordinary thing I think I've ever seen. And then this abandoned riverbed where only one species of tree grow. That's a sort of inspiration. I mean, I wish my work could be as specific as a response to a particular, microclimate like that. And so that's what I seek. And then I look at artists. I look at artists for the clarity and singularity of their ideas. Eva Hess this beautiful box. Sol LeWitt I discovered when I was an undergrad. I went to Pratt for a while in New York. That was the first time I went to New York. You know, Sol LeWitt, Carl Andre, a lot of the folks you see there. But just the singularity of the gesture, their ability to distill an idea, and I don't mean reductive, even though a lot of those are considered minimalists. But I don't mean a reductive language or a reductive form, but just the clarity of thought. And as I've done more museums and had a chance to meet quite a few artists, the engagement of the conversation of ideas has been a great inspiration to me. It's also been a liberation when you talk to a writer or an artist or another, someone involved in creative practice. You find out that we're all involved in the same pursuits. We share a lot of the same motivations, a lot of the same inspirations, same inquiry, and the only thing that changes is the vehicle. Our vehicle of expression. Theirs is art, mine's buildings, but it was a reassuring. When I did the book, Occupation, I don't know if any of you have seen this, I got to interview different people for that book and have conversations. And it was one of the most liberating things that has happened to me. I've worked with Richard Serra on the left. I helped, this is a little too close, I think. It's doing weird shit, isn't it?
Picking up whatever
Yeah.
you bump it.
Whenever I breathe or something.
Just don't do that.
Yeah. If I talk fast enough, I won't have to breathe. I got to work with Richard Serra in St. Louis in my first museum, the Contemporary Art Museum of St. Louis, to cite that piece. And that was very, very exciting, being able to have conversations with him. And then Anne Hamilton, an amazing artist. I don't know if you all know her work. You need to go get a book on Anne Hamilton. It's required as part of this evening. There's going to be 3 or 4 of those. I just had dinner with her in Ohio two nights ago. Incredible artist. This is a tower she did on the Oliver Ranch in Northern California. That's a listening device, and when it's just an empty tower with water at the bottom and 2 spiraling stairs. It's about 8 stories high, I think. And the opening of it, she had Meredith Monk do a performance musical piece in it. It was one of the most profound things I've ever experienced. And then this is a project. This is a house we did in Dutchess County. I don't know if you've seen that. I'm not presenting it tonight, but it was for some collectors. They have about 400 acres of land in upstate New York. And I was designing the house. The house wasn't built, and they asked Doug Aiken to walk the site and choose a place, and they would commission a piece for him. And he walked the site, and he knew we were doing the house, so he said, I want to meet the architects. So we met, and we showed him the models, and I talked about the ideas that I was sort of creating this orthogonal helix of a house to try to bind the site in some way, the house to the site, and that the house had 3 different kinds of glass and reflected with the attempt of kind of dissolving into the landscape, not just reflect into the landscape, but kind of blur the boundaries of the landscape and the house. So he came back and chose the house as his site. I'm not sure if I have the other image or not. Yeah. So he filmed it over a whole year from different proximities and different seasons. We sighted 16 projectors, and when the sun goes down and they turn the projectors on, the house literally dissolves. And it was so thrilling for me, I'll go back to that, to have a conversation about what I was trying to do with the building, realizing that the building can only do so much. Buildings are burdened with construction types and functions and the sort of conventions of construction. But he was able to take the same idea and extend it even further with his conception of this piece. I mean, as I was trying to dissolve the house spatially and through light, he did it through these projections. And when the sun goes down, the house disappears, and you completely lose your orientation of where the house starts and stops. It's a crazy, crazy project. It's about a 20-minute film, actually. It's quite something. So I've learned, I think, in meeting other creative people, seeing other work, I think it's extremely important to look at things other than architecture. Certainly when you're a student, doing studies of certain iconic pieces, they used to in the old days make students redraw buildings. When I went to Columbia, they were still doing that. It's an old Beaux-Arts practice, but it's a great thing. It's a really great thing. So looking very closely at historically important work, work you love, but also looking at other creative makers. You know, learning how other people develop ideas and embodying them in work in different medium and different forms, I think is a really, really important. There's also a super important book you should buy. It's called Being in Circumstance by Robert Irwin. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's about a lot of things I'll be talking about tonight. Caseworks. So we just opened a show in January at the Denver Art Museum of what we call our concept models and sketches, non-representational parts of our work, the kind of middle part, early and middle part of the process, not the finished images. And for about 5 years, working with different museum directors and curators, they would see our work that we would bring to meetings or see them. Most often in the beginning, we didn't even show them to clients. You know, it's hard to show a client a drawing like that and say, this is your project. Are you excited? You know, $70 million, there it is. But seriously, these are drawings that I do for myself to try to begin the conversation. These are the drawings I share with the office to begin the studies, but it was work for us. And so all of these various folks said, you need to have a show, you should have a show. These are important things, and the idea that showing things that were never meant to be shown, and certainly never meant to be shown in a museum, it was difficult for me, but as the practice has become more and more image and object focused, and style focused, and brand focused, I don't think it's ever been as extreme in the history of architecture. So the opportunity to talk about ideas and making that aren't about style, that aren't about image, but that are about essential searches for qualities, for experiences, for visceral things. And I think, architecture, if there's one thing we have on the other arts, it's the visceral experience. You can touch them, you can see them over time, you can develop a relationship with them that's personal, that you don't have to be privileged, you don't have to go to a museum, you don't have to go to concerts. They're very, very visceral, emotive things. So these are our explorations, looking for those qualities, trying to determine which qualities make sense for which projects. So in the beginning, when we do models, we do a lot of material exploration. We have a shop in the basement in Portland. We do this in New York, too, and just render the bathrooms in the hallway toxic. But we explore the possibilities of materials to represent ideas. And again, back to Richard Serra's work, his oil stick drawings, his maquettes, that are small studies and they're material explorations. Those are a great example for his torqued ellipses, which I don't know if any of you have seen any of his torqued pieces, but they're the most powerful pieces of architecture I've ever been in my entire life. And they're around. Dia Beacon. If you haven't been, you have to go up there too. This summer, you have a lot to do. Anyway, I'm inspired by that practice, the rigor. His work too. It was very interesting. Emmy Pulitzer was big art collector. Did the Ondo building that's in St. Louis. Was the patron of the little museum that I did next to it. Her husband Joe commissioned Sarah to do his first site-specific piece. And it was pieces of steel on the sort of four compass posts in the land on their summer house property. And he's been working in steel, in Corten steel, for his whole life. And I think the discipline of that and learning what is possible with that material, he ended up working with shipbuilders somewhere in Germany when this whole revelation happened for him. And he created, after 40 years of working with the same material, he reinvented sculpture in space. So, it's not about novelty, it's not about searching for the new, but it's really searching for an understanding, a way of thinking. I love ceramics. Lucy Reeves, one of my favorite potters, beautiful, beautiful studies in form and line and marking the clay. Again, I think one thing, too, when you're developing your skill sets, like we all are still, actually. Finding mentors, finding practices, finding creative practices that you can learn from. like a potter or a painter or anything, a furniture maker, anything you're drawn to, right? That's in the visual world. It's just look at their practices, because then you see how they do really bad stuff. They make mistakes. They go away for years. Their practice. I'm sure they're completely depressed, and no one buys their work, and then suddenly they make a breakthrough, and it comes back again, and it's just interesting through time to watch that happen, and again, I think liberating. So we decided to do the show. I'm talking a heck of a lot, and I'm still spitting into my mic. Try that. We decided to do the show. Dean Sobel, the director of the Cloepfil Still Museum, got us to do it. And it really just shows what I call the sort of residue of a visual industry. It shows the pieces of exploration. Some of these later ones in built form, some of them site pieces. These are some of the first things we did for the little winery that I'll show you. Just bits of making, and we work in a visual practice, and we operate in scale. I think that's also interesting and unique. Some of the sculptors do, right? Clifford Still used to do these little tiny miniature paintings, which I tried to steal when I was doing the museum, because there was 3,000 of them. I thought they wouldn't miss one. But yeah, there was actually some that were unnumbered, and I really made a play, but it didn't happen. But he would do these little studies. He would call them drawings, but they're actually little gestural paintings, just vignettes. And I think it's crucially important to make your ideas and your search for ideas visual. Find whatever way you can, If you knit, you can knit it. If you can it doesn't matter what it is. Just make it visual and get it out there, because every time you do, the practice of that, even a little tiny summary act that just takes a minute in a sketch or an ugly little model, it'll inspire you in ways. And these works for us, are to inspire us to pursue the ideas. These are our acts of inspiration and evocation, and these are our tests. So we'll dive in. This was a model. Yeah, this is how to lose a competition. If you want to know how to lose a competition, this is for an arts center on this beautiful site in UC Santa Cruz. So down there on the water, it's just up on a hill with the oaks looking over. And so I designed a 1,900-foot long timber. I called it a front porch to the campus. It was right at the top of a meadow. Anyway, we took this thread model. That's how you get second. I'm going to show you lots of ways to get second in competitions tonight. But for us, we had renderings of the finished building, obviously. But for us, this was the spirit of it. We put it on a site model, and it was the spirit of what we were pursuing. These sketches, which I'll talk about in a minute, relative to the National Music Center of Canada, some of the first ideas. And then they led to these models, looking for these kind of vessels that hold the music, these different towers, which led to this, which I'll tell you the story now that we can skip over it later, but we were searching for this model to take to the interview, and my concept, again, was these vessels of music. Some are performance, some are galleries, some are education, each of them different, and you'd step out of each experience into silence and connect back out to the landscape. So thus the gaps between. And we were doing all these wax models and all these crazy things, and they were just, they just weren't right. And I literally said to some of the young interns in my office, said, can't you just go buy a musical instrument, cut it up, and cast it? And, they're so earnest, they literally went to Goodwill, bought a trombone, cut it up, and cast it, and blew my mind. I mean, this thing, it's still one of the, I think, most profound things we've done in the office. It just represents the absolute spirit of what it was. But again, you go to an interview in the final 5 for a competition and you show them things like this. It takes a certain kind of client. It just takes a certain kind of client that realizes this is the potential of the building. You know, you're not showing them an image, you're showing them the potential of an idea. And you know, in our image-saturated culture, and especially with lay people, it's hard. It's challenging. It's challenging for them to be able to go with you. After we won the project, I didn't want the building to be so singular. It also had to bridge over a street and have some towers on the other side. So I tried to figure out a way to tie it all together. And so we began this whole investigation of these walls that changed forms and touched and created transfer beams, which you'll see, yeah, it gets pretty complex. It's actually two different systems of transfer beams. I have to show this because it's so cool. It might help you understand. So these start as orthogonal walls and then touch at the top, and this hangs a structure over the performance hall, and then it hangs the bridge over the street. This is just the opposite. They're orthogonal at top, and they transform and create a series of transfer beams about 165 feet that lift so there can be a larger common space under these little vessels for the lobby, which you'll see some construction shots here in a minute. I'm going way too slow. So then the show was how to present these things. I didn't want to place them on, white pedestals under plastic vitrines and, treat them like art. So we spent some time thinking about it and came up with this idea that these are really our tools. These are our visual tools. Let's treat them like tools and put them in toolboxes. So we designed a series of toolboxes, all with various operations. This is the Hall of Mirrors. And we built these in our shop downstairs. And young architecture students built these things. They almost survived. It was amazing, but it was an incredible thing. And they all open up in various ways. I think this one has some trick photograph. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't do that. These boxes perform various operations, some related to the work, some not. But there's 10 different toolboxes that help present and hold the work. And they kind of gather the work together and present it. And then we had to hold the room. How would these boxes be arrayed in a room? So I designed a series of thresholds, 8 foot high, a system of steel panels that hold the space of the room, and then at 3 feet high, hold these different toolboxes so you can engage them with your eye, and if you're a school group, with your hands. We've had some issues with the little brats. They're like candy, these things. Hard not to touch. So I think it's exciting. For me, it was important to put the work out, not to show our work as much as to state a position. That architecture is really about ideas long before form, based on experience, based on quality, based on the potential of certain sites, certain institutions, certain materials. We do a lot of work in concrete. All 3 of these studies. This was a study for the Contemporary Art Museum St. Louis. These are studies for the Ohio Veterans Memorial in porcelain, because a woman in the studio, she got excited. She always wanted to do it, so she and I did that. And then this is a CNC wood model later on for that same project, actually. So that's how the work begins. I will try to move a little faster here. I love the fact I'm drinking my road beer that I bought. I appreciate it, you guys. Thank you. This is the only time in my career that I was able to drink at the podium. It's really nice. I'm going to tell everyone. You guys you'll get people to come almost for free now. If they realize you could. It's a great place to be. So this is a little project. And I wasn't going to show you this project because it's so small, but it's actually one of my favorites. And as I saw that beautiful landscape open up, right when I was coming up here, this is such a beautiful place. Oklahoma is a gorgeous place. with that sky and that endless surface and the crazy scale. You don't get that. You don't get it in Oregon because it's forested. The sky's taken away and there's hills and, it's so lush. I always say it kind of sucks light out of the air. It's so intense. But this is the area, the wine country that's sort of exploded in the last, 30, 40 years, not very far from Portland. It's actually near where my cousin has a farm near here. I wish he'd gotten into wine, but he has a farm near here. My parents grew up near here. So it's a landscape that I know really well. And I had always wanted to do a winery, and I did a restaurant. And the manager of that restaurant then came to work at the winery and got me hired to do this. So it's a series of rolling hills, and I'll show you the site in a second. And so I wanted the building to be of the earth and almost to be carved out of the earth. So this is an early concept model of these stacked shingles with a kind of open cuts through. And so I have to get my own orientation here. So this is the site, which looks at the top of this hill, looks up at that view you just saw, and then down into the valley below. I mean, a beautiful sight never hurts, and I think the more you listen to the site and to sort of allow the site to influence the work and express the work, I think the more profound the experience. One of the things I talk about in some of the writing too is I think of buildings as amplifiers of what exists. I don't think of buildings of creating anything new, actually. I think the best buildings can amplify some specific understanding or experience. And in so amplifying, it feels new because it's kind of decontextualized or recontextualized in this building, and you see it in a way that you never would have seen it before. But the intent, I guess I should say, is not to create something new, but maybe create new understanding or a new way of seeing or a new experience. So we got to do the whole site. So we carved 4 terraces, 2 of them for parking, 1 for the building, and 1 above is a kind of lawn. And then the building itself rose from that terrace. It has a green roof that you see there, kind of in the middle. I got to do all of the landscape, not planting, because I don't know plant species that well, obviously, but I got to conceive of the gardens and the way the landscapes use. It was extremely fun for me. I'm a big gardener. So the sketches of how this building gets carved and the sites and the view and things move through. And it's a vernacular building. It's a farm building. So choosing to do wood was both for an economy. It's not a very expensive building, $2.5 million building. And it's surrounded by wood buildings. The history of the Willamette Valley and wood buildings. So it's a green roof, the earth lifted, off of that hill. The building has a kind of mass, and to exaggerate that mass, I made it all one material and all one surface. So you'd really feel like you were embedded in a building, kind of inside that building in space. And so we did a lot of drawings like these of the different patterning of the wood. All these different surfaces that change and move and open to views and reflect light. And that's the final plan of the building itself. I think it's about 4,500 square feet. Basically, I designed a really great place to sit and drink wine. So, simple little building. But it had one thought. I mean, it was interesting for me because we usually expose structure too, so we couldn't expose structure. So what was the thought? What was the expression? And so it's a kind of pure material and spatial expression. So the Clifford Still Museum, I think it's been open a few years now. I don't know if any of you have seen it. We were invited to pursue that project. I had seen his work when I was at Columbia, so I had known his work since the mid-'80s. And so when this project came up, I was really, really very, very, very excited. He grew up in North Dakota. My family's actually from Minnesota and Kansas. And I knew the landscape of North Dakota where he grew up. Actually, my grandmother was from Alberta, just north of the border. Or from, Alberta, just north of the border. So I was just very, very excited about the spirit and soul of his work and his paintings. And Denver, where it is a prairie town. There's a metaphorical Libeskind building, the Denver Art Museum, next to my small little project where he alludes to mountain forms. But Denver is actually a prairie town. This is the landscape of Denver right here. This is what it is. So it's about light and surface. And so my first sketches after I went and visited the site before the competition, there's an open park space that we got to design, and then the building itself. And what I wanted to do was to bring the light down into the earth and show these paintings in natural light. So that sketch led to this concept model of compressed charcoal and resin with shafts of light coming down into and a light diffusing surface, that little plex, kind of bonded plex thing on the right there. And then I wanted the building to be embedded in the landscape. I didn't want the building to be seen as a facade. I wanted you to find the building under a canopy of trees. So my landscape concept of just really burying the building in the trees, it's also because you can't compete with the imagery of the Libeskind building. It's impossible, both because this building's 28,000 square feet, not very big, but obviously an entirely different purpose. Civic buildings exert kind of form and iconography, and we'll talk about that a little bit with the National Music Center of Canada. This is a single building, a small building for a single artist and for a single person's creative voice, so it's a much more intimate experience. Later concept model based on the sketches. Again, you can see the legacy of that first concept model in the building mass, but I did this charcoal sketch on a plane where I just wanted the whole thing to feel, the trees and the building to feel like one thing, like it was one mass of light and shadow and pattern. And so that was, again, that sketch, one of my employees, I said, can't you route it out of something? And he went and got some used wood and he routed it out, and there it was. So the building itself, this is the only problem with landscape. Trees take 30, 40 years, little baby trees. And we got the biggest ones we could afford. It's painful. I'll be dead before it happens. But it is interesting because, landscape takes 20, 30 years to actually happen. The building itself. Materiality. I wanted the building, it's really interesting. These are these basalt columns that are all over the Pacific Northwest, particularly in Oregon in the desert. There's a couple river trips you take where you go by these amazing overhangs of these basalt columns. And I wanted the building, again, to have that kind of carved mass. And so the recession hit right as we were in design. And we had pre-selected a contractor that performed their own concrete. So they had nothing to do. We had not much to do other than have the budget because of the recession. But we got to do all of these experiments with concrete, placing concrete. I should say, between the basalt columns and this, I actually wanted to cast obsidian into the concrete. And I found one quarry in Brazil where you can actually quarry black glass obsidian. But then it doesn't chemically bind, I guess. We ended up hiring a professor, a chemist at Columbia University, to try to figure out how to do it, but we couldn't figure it out. But so this is like dry lifts of stone with concrete poured in between it, which of course the freeze thaw would go in there and pop the whole thing apart. This is a really smart idea I had too. So we adhered things to the form panels that would wash off, so they would mess with the concrete and we wouldn't. The whole goal for me was to make it feel like it wasn't composed, like we couldn't totally control it. I didn't want the building I wanted the building to be about the paintings and the light, not about the design of the concrete panels or, the hand of the architect. So this is a really funny one. So we adhered salt crystals to the panels and then power washed them out. Well, of course, the salt leaches into the concrete, and in the middle of concrete is steel. And what does salt do to steel? So that was a really bad idea that we had, too. But these are all the different explorations. We shot stone into the concrete. We did all kinds of crazy stuff. But we had this wonderful luxury of working with this contractor and to explore. Oh, these are good, too. So then we did these tests in the office. You guys can use that one if you want. Use shag rug as a shorm panel. Yeah, that was one of my literal ones. Well, can't we use a shag rug? And yeah, it was not very good. But the idea is that it would move, right? And so then, I said if the concrete could ooze through, the form, it would be perforated and wouldn't work. And then I said, what if we do really thin strips of concrete that would deform with the pressure and then leak? And then that's where we got, and that's where the kind of breakthrough was, Very, very common, board form concrete. So we weren't going crazy with the budget or pushing the construction technology itself. We just wanted them to do, bad formwork, basically. But you'd be surprised. I mean, they just panicked. The contractor panicked. You want us to break off those fins? So we designed there's two different depths of the concrete walls that express a little bit of the function. And so there's like full 2x material and 1x material, and we mitered the edges. And we had to do lots of mock-ups for how thick the miter was, because if it was too thin, they would all break off when you pull the boards off. And if it was too thick, of course, they don't break off. So we got to do some mock-ups. That's what all of these were, right? And so the forms leak, they break, and it just creates, so this is all of the different boards. And the pattern there is a pattern, and it was derived from the grid of the perforation for light in the ceiling that you'll see in a minute, and it was just extended all over the surface. That way we didn't have to think of a new thing. So the boards were all numbered, placed on the wall, and then that's what happened. And getting back to, there's actually a study model that we did, a 1/2 inch to the foot plaster study model that we lit. And the kind of dappled lights that come through the leaves of the trees, just the changing light on the surface, kind of broken shadows, that was really the spirit of the thing. And then the body of the building, this was before the National Music Center. I wanted it to feel like it was in the earth. I wanted it to feel like one thing. That was the reason I chose concrete. So the walls, ceiling, floors, everything, would just be of one material. And this is this amazing artist. These are porcelain. I have to go meet her. I don't know how these are done, and they're big. Some of them, really big, but they're just extraordinary. And I wanted that space to be kind of endlessly unfolding on itself, like that. These are the studies for light. Different qualities of light. Now we move into digital tools, obviously, working with some very sophisticated daylight designers. We use these to sort of explore quality. They got more and more resolved as we got data information about the size of the aperture, the depth of the slab itself. These are then structural drawings, back to the Ava Held. We did like 150 of these cardboard structural models. All the walls are structural, so it's a cellular thing. The walls are orthogonal because you have to hang art on them. But they're all sort of incomplete, and they stack and interweave in different ways. And if you're in the building, you realize the building always kind of reveals the next room, and you're never completely held in a space by itself. Boy, these are crazy resolution. Boy, oh boy. Yeah. Well, let's just move through that. You can find those in books. So you come into the lobby itself, which is the left-hand image. It's only 10 feet high, and it's a 150-foot cantilever. That grid of walls that are some of them 20 feet tall become huge beams, right? So they can reach out and do a mid-span for some of these cantilevers. Once you have a series of concrete walls, you can pretty much do anything, and then it's all site cast, and then the ceiling itself is a site cast slab, and it creates couldn't that quality of light for those paintings. I mean, we discovered something. In searching for the quality of light, we discovered a quality of light. So back to the concept model, think about that. The light comes in through the slab, and then we cut shafts down. All the lower is open storage and archives. So the art is on the top, and when you cross the little bridges, you look down deeper into the work of Clyfford Still. And then when you're down in the archives and the open storage, you see that you're sort of drawn to the light, and you see people cross the bridge, and you realize there's a whole nother world. And then the gallery floors, some of them complete, some of them not complete. There's low ceiling galleries with no light for the drawings, and high ceilings with the natural light for these paintings, many of which had never been shown. There's a whole story to Clyfford Still's work that's pretty interesting as well. But when you have those paintings, you kind of win. You sort of win already. So my goal was just to serve that experience. This is a project. I was just in Ohio a couple days ago, looking at the first concrete mock-up. This is a crazy project. So it was, again, invited competition to do a Veterans Memorial and Museum in Columbus, Ohio. There's a site across from downtown on the river. I don't know if we even have an aerial of it, but it was a kind of marker to draw you across the river to this. They're going to redevelop this whole section of the city that's been sort of moribund, and they wanted this building to be a gateway piece. And so it's an enormous site with a very small building. And to hold the site, I needed to do more than just place an object on it, so I conceived the building as carved and lifted from the earth again, and created a processional and an amphitheater for all the various ceremonies, memorial ceremonies, commissioning ceremonies. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of honoring and coming and going that happens with people who serve, and the building is attempting to elevate that. There it is on the site plan with the ramp going up to the amphitheater. Then we work with Laurie Olin to design a kind of memorial grove of trees in the back. And this road is the bridge that goes over to downtown. So digital studies. So one of the things, the concept model was really this earth scheme, but if you'll notice, there's no structure. It was kind of magic in that way, because it's not really a building idea yet. And so how do we hold that up? And I wanted to feel as though it was torn from the earth. I don't know where that image went away. So I created this kind of sinew structure that lifts this building up, and they are actually concrete arches. These are the beginnings of the studies for the different rings, that kind of lift and rattle around for each other. There it is, out of sequence. And so this idea of these tendons or these sinews then became rationalized as arches, right? And then the forces of the ramp and what the ramp needs to do to reach it, and the slope of the amphitheater, these are kind of unrolled elevations, if you will, which we did, as you can imagine, a number of those, looking at various precedent, trying to find engineers, frankly, who could do this. The structural system is kind of out of this world, but we figured it out. So these huge arches that cantilever out because the form is sort of circular, right? So they arch, but they cantilever out, so they tend to fall over. So we created a big concrete tension ring that holds this whole thing together. But man, oh man, if I showed you, I wish I had the steel in the mock-up. The amount of reinforcing steel in these things is beyond belief. And just like the daylighting, we could not have designed, I mean, we could have been lucky on Cloepfil still, but we've been collaborating with the daylighting designers at Arup forever, for the last 15, 20 years. And that particular creative relationships plus the data that they can generate from the sky now. I mean, that data has probably only been available for the last 10 years. So that you can use real data to at least control the light. The quality is mystical, but you can control and determine light levels in ways you never could before. And I would say it's the same thing with the computer modeling of this crazy structure. I don't think without this modeling tool they could do this. I don't think there's any way. And just so you know, this is good, and this means you're really screwed. Right there. This means Brad wanted it to be really thin, and Brad didn't really get his way because it doesn't work that way. Incredible exploration, this thing, structurally, just beyond. I mean, it's one of those things. This is a later model than of the final design. It's one of those things, and there it is. So. It's a monument. It is a form. It's supposed to be a kind of iconic image for the city and for the veterans of Ohio. But it was a very interesting exploration. And one thing I was going to say about construction is we always work with contractors early on as we can. We don't bid things. We pre-select so that we can try to figure out together how to build the things that we design. And we usually have a wonderful experience. In this one, it proved to be too much. Like a week before construction was supposed to start, the concrete contractor quit and said, we're not doing it. So it made me ponder for the first time in my career, what if you design a building that no one wants to build? You realize, even though we could do it, and the German engineers, Knippers, that we were working with, we could conceive it, they could, engineer it. And we know a lot about concrete at this stage and forming, so this was something we knew was possible. But somebody has to want to do it. Those contractors have to be creative partners as well. And so luckily we found someone. So they started construction, and the building will open in fall 2017. So there's 3 rings of structure that you kind of move deeper and deeper into, with the sort of end of the exhibition cycle being this cyclorama. The whole conception, we're working with Ralph Applebaum, and the whole conception of the museum is about the idea of service. It's not about the military specifically, but it uses military service to create a conversation about, doing things for other purposes and other. Boy, that just doesn't read at all, does it? But anyway, you walk in, just really quickly, you walk in and move through the galleries and then pass through one of the boundaries and then pass through the boundaries and end up in this cyclorama, which is a sort of digital display of letters from soldiers, which is unbelievably moving. Anyway, it's an amazing thing sometime. Next time you're in Columbus, you can see it after 2017. That's the cyclorama itself. I'm trying to move a little faster to show you a few more things. Just the geometries. So that's the other thing which you'll see in the National Music Center. Our ability to digitally model these things in ways that can be communicated with the contractors. We don't use Revit because we're not very smart. We've done all these things in Grasshopper and Rhino ourselves, and the contractors will use our models, but so far we just do it ourselves. Yeah. So the National Music Center, this is also under construction. The competition was won as I showed you with those sketches and models. This is a bad resolution. This is downtown Calgary, Alberta. This is one of their first big cultural buildings. This is the Stampede Grounds. They have a very famous rodeo. That's the road that goes to, and then this is a gateway to a whole area of town that they want to redevelop, of which they are redeveloping actually. But they chose to site this, the National Music Center Museum there as a kind of catalyst. So this, that's the undeveloped area of town. This is our site, bridges over, and we had to keep this old jazz club that was boarded up. The museum bought it as a performance venue. So I looked to the land, again, the northern prairie, right at the foothills of the Canadian Rockies, which are staggering. And how do you hold yourself in that landscape? Was a lot to do with it. It was undeveloped, urban context, there wasn't any buildings around, but it's also a building, again, on the prairie. And these hoodoos, which coincidentally, these sandstone formations are in southern Alberta, and when Clifford Still was growing up as a teenager, he painted those. It was kind of an amazing. So looking at geographic landscape forms, thinking about musical instruments and the way they're made. This is the very first sketch. The idea of these towers sort of holding the land, like I said, with these different musical experiences, with these entirely different lives inside of them. This led then to the competition, which was this little animation that we produced in the office of those towers and the space between and the kind of life of it. And then that sketch, as I mentioned. So that sketch led to how do we tie these forms together? Initially, we used paper and museum board to try to just see what the possibilities were. Then we moved into, obviously, digital modeling of ways of those surfaces to be continuous. And then the forms that we discussed briefly. And here you can see, just to help you understand, because you're going to see photos in a minute that are really difficult. That's where it touches at the top, and then 4 stories down, that's where it touches at the bottom. So that's those transfer beams, and that's the thing at the top. The renderings of being in those in-between spaces. So we put stairs in those in-between spaces. And it evokes those landscape forms to an extent. Those are the big transfer beams, early studies for the common space. And then the building itself, we went back to Royal Tischelaar, the porcelain company that we worked with on the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, and got to create glazes. The outer surfaces of the building are orthogonal at the streets and kind of hold the street facade, and then everything past that plane starts to move. And so the street facades are a kind of slate glaze, and everything inside is what I call a platinum glaze. So again, working with craftspeople, very, very fun. We show them stuff like this, right? This is the sort of search for the qualities of the platinum one. Oil and sort of hematite and slate and molten metal. And then these led to these tiles, which you'll see in place then in a minute. And there's the building now. Some development has happened already. And the renderings themselves. And it was interesting. We hadn't had the opportunity until recently, with this building, the Ohio building, and we're doing it at U.S. Embassy in Mozambique, where the building has to create an iconography and an image, that represents the aspirations of a nation's musical heritage, that represents our nation in Africa, that represents the kind of struggle and elevates the service of the veterans. So suddenly they have to have form, they have to have memory that way. And the search for form is a really interesting thing.
See the low battery signal.
Oh,
We need to plug you in.
probably do. Or I could just quit talking, because it's probably been enough time. Should we? I guess we should have thought of that, huh?
This is our fast solution here.
Yeah.
Run it out.
Okay. We're almost done. Again, I won't walk through the plans, but I'll show the images. This is that transfer beam in the auditorium. And in all of the gaps, light comes down from the sky. So it's sort of woven together with structure and woven together with light. That's the transfer beam where the auditorium is hung above. And then the stairs in the gaps. Moving up the stairs, you're kind of at the transfer beam level looking into the auditorium space. And then up the stairs with those surfaces. I mean, it's interesting in this one, the architecture is really about the in-between, the spaces of rest and reorientation, because the galleries themselves are primarily dark and digital, you know. So they're kind of their own, it's more of a narrative museum than it is an experiential museum. And all these Canadian artists that most of us didn't even know were Canadian, which is one of the reasons they're doing it as well. And those are the spaces between. These are actual photographs, not renderings. So you're just in this world. You're lost in this world as you move through this building, and you hear music coming up. The auditorium is open to the space, so it filters up, and so you go into these galleries with these intense experiences, and you come back in. And those are looking up. Yeah, I can't even tell what that is. No, that's looking up. That's looking up past the transfer beams again. God, these are disorienting. I just got these, by the way. So it's about creating a world, I think. I mean, I think in all of these projects, entering into a world where you to a certain extent lose touch with the sort of day-to-day spatial architectural experience, and in losing touch kind of open yourself up to something new, right? Just by that sense of wonder and curiosity, and perhaps a little bit of disorientation. Look, this tile does amazing things in the light, as you can see on the outside. And there it is. Should I do one more project, or should we end? Huh? You guys, what are you going to say now? You don't really have a choice. You can't say, get the hell out of here. I'll do this fast. This was a competition for a new wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We got second after working on it for a year. Amazing opportunity to investigate this building and its collection. And I want to show you the project just for the solution itself. So I'll go kind of quick on this one. Daunting, as you might imagine, Metropolitan Museum of Art. So we were asked to consider, they were tearing down this wing, so a new wing there on the park, and a new entrance on the park. So thinking about their modern and contemporary collection, and they do have Lucy Rees, see that beautiful pot up there, some other of my favorites here, and the existing galleries themselves, how to make it a part of this sort of large, almost city-like experience of galleries. We did a lot of analytics looking at qualities of light, public and private, circulation patterns, where there are places of respite and orientation. It is truly like a city, and when you enter into it and when you add on to it and amend it, you have to sort of understand the system such as it is that exists. So then we got to create this piece at the corner, a new piece with a possible entrance on the park. The idea of the park and the building joining together, and where the park and the building join together, there are shafts of light. And in those shafts of light is where the structure is. So it's a 3-story building, and I wanted the light to come all the way down three floors, obviously diminishing as it comes down. So the light follows the structure. So these bays of galleries then would become divisible, and this is where the structure and the services and the light come down. And then the structure transfers to create bigger and smaller galleries. Because it's a lot of small fins of structure, it can transfer like the drawing on the left. And then this is the study of light, and it's along with the structure and what it does. And the renderings themselves. We were cladding these concrete fins in limestone. But it's a kind of an amazing quality of light as it moves down through the building. And the building itself is really just a giant filter of light. And they wanted it to open to the park, so we created this prismatic facade, which I think frightened everybody a little bit. They're just made out of cast pieces of glass that have different finishes on the surface. And so they protect it from the west light. That's the south facade with deep structure, those deep structural fins exposed. And then as the galleries lay themselves out. So there's that sense of the structure and light falling, and the structure that doesn't come to the ground and gets transferred in some of those gaps. And our friend Richard Serra, how did he get there? I don't know how you get the art in there, that's for sure. And then moving up through those light shafts and through the weaving through that structure as it starts and stops. So you follow the kind of structure and light up through the galleries and the patterns of rooms. And as the structure stops, it brings light to the center of the space too. This is truly one of the favorite things I've ever done. Incredible gallery space. Just incredible gallery space. There again, you see some of those, the transferring of the structure with the volume then moving through it. And I think the insight that we had is that the gaps above the walls can really act like clear stories, even though you're one whole floor down. So you get the diffused light. This is actually the top floor. But in the lower image that I showed you, then you get that diffused light like clear story. And then everything looking back out to the park. You see out into that prismatic facade, and it kind of fractures the image of the park. And the galleries at the edge then have obviously things that are allowed to have light, and you can cap them to take away the light. And again, everywhere you pass, you get glimpses back out and reference the park. These crazy prisms, which we actually detailed. I don't know if I have the drawings in here or not. And then the roof terrace itself. So, perhaps that's enough. So this exploration is an exploration to find the architecture. Right? To find the possible architecture that's inherent in a... Here, I'll go back. No more. That's it. What's that?
You can take whatever.
No. That's enough. I know these guys. I'm sitting up here with my beer. I'll go all night. So I hope you see, and I guess what I was hoping to share is just the sense of inquiry and the kind of openness and somewhat of a resistance to preconceived style and imagery. And I think that resistance is not, it's funny that the resistance is not the position. The position is each project has its own potential architecture, and that I don't know what it is when I start. I don't know what material it should be, what form it should be. You know, we spend a great deal of time learning about the institution, looking at the site, you know, thinking about their aspirations. You know, what are the qualities they want to communicate with the Met? You know, it was really a chance to kind of rethink the Met and how they want to be communicated to the city and to the world. And it's the same with every institution, no matter how humble. You know, that's one of the great joys, is having those conversations with people about what their aspirations are. You know, what do they hope? Not what do they hope the building can be, but what do they want for themselves and their business or their institution or their city, and try to find a way that the architecture can serve that. And it's funny that we end up doing a museum of service, but this idea that architecture can and should serve something other than itself. You know, serve something other than the architect. Serve something for sure other than design, but serve a kind of elevation of ideas and a presence, and a kind of and a spirit, and to try to create an architecture that moves you in some way, moves you to other understandings. You know, we've all been in those rooms, you know, hopefully, or if you haven't, once you start traveling. I mean, that's one of the great things about living in the West. We don't need to go to buildings to be moved like that. You know, we have this landscape and the light, and this crazy light that you get here, and the crazy weather that you get here. I mean, you're like, your landscape is like a temple. It's just an incredible thing, and learn from those things. And I try to imbue the architecture with some of those qualities of kind of change and wonder. And it's an important thing. It's a very important thing, especially in these times, I think. So, thank you for coming. I'll stop, I promise. I would love to take a few questions. I have to say one more thing. My friend Ann Hamilton, this artist that you're going to go out and buy books, when I heard her talk once, right after we gotten to know each other, she came to Portland for a lecture. And she talked about, I mean, here's this wildly successful artist, very just amazing work. And she used this term when she was talking about the Oliver Ranch piece, right? That it was a privilege, you know, that doing the work was a privilege. You know, and you think of the ego of the architect and the artist, right? And to hear someone speak of the work that way, you know, that allowing her to do her work is really, she sees it as a great privilege. And I think that spirit also, architecture could benefit from a little bit of that humility as well. And it's interesting, you know, I don't want to say, you want to be anything but humble with your ideas. You want to be really bold with your ideas. But realize they're not about you. You know, the best ideas are bigger than all of us and are shared by other people. And that way they're perceived. You know, if your best ideas are not perceived, right, or they're personal, they won't resonate. They just won't resonate. Okay, now I'll be quiet. Any questions? That's it, huh?
You're talking about how we try to get what the institution wants to be and the client, and it almost sounds like you engage in a certain kind of therapy. And I was wondering if you see it that way, and if so, you know, what does that consist of?
It's to me, it probably is to a certain extent, because people get to talk about. I mean, we're doing headquarters in Tokyo for a clothing company called Uniqlo, huge global clothing company. And the owner, Mr. Yanai, came to my office in New York, and he's the richest man in Japan, right? And he has this wildly successful company that's just going like crazy, and he comes and says, we have to change the way we work, we have to do all this stuff. And I said, you know, Mr. Yanai, it seems like you're doing pretty well the way things are, you know. It's worth $34 million. to me, it's a question. I ask those questions because I need to understand to be able to do the architecture, right? Because people think buildings. One of the things I've learned here. How did I say it the other day? People come to you with what are they? Oh, how did I say it? I wish I could say it again. But people don't know really what they come to you with needs, but they don't know which of those needs can be solved by the architecture, right? Even when they have a program, oh, we need more, this gallery space, we need more classroom, whatever it is. 9 times out of 10, that's not what they need, or not all that they need, right? That there's other things to think about that would solve some of the problems that they're assigning to these various requirements, right? So you try to get in there and figure out what the quest. You really want to try to share the quest, and then you can determine what the architecture can or can't do. And it's hard. It's hard for us, because they come and we want iconic architecture, and you're competing like we are now with like Big and Rem and all these people, Snoetta, image makers, and we're not image makers. It takes us a long time to find the image, So I think for us, I don't know if I'm even answering that very well. The people that want to work with us want it to be a process of inquiry. They're not hiring you. They're not hiring us just to do a building, right? And a lot of people think buildings are the solutions, and they rarely are the solution. Very rarely are the solution. I mean, for developers, they're a solution because the buildings represent money, right? Without a building, they don't make money. But probably other than developers, architecture is only part of the solution.
You said that architecture is about branding, and I agree that there's a lot of branding that's happening. And as you were showing your projects, I really appreciated the work, and I noticed a common theme is the idea of a vessel.
Mm-hmm.
Vessels of light or vessels were somehow prevalent in what you were showing as a consistent.
Oh boy, sorry.
Even in the winery, it had a sense of vessel bullets type in the earth and all of the galleries and so forth. Is that something that you consciously look for?
I wouldn't. No, I love your perception. I don't. Vessel isn't the word I would use. There's a common. There's a series of ideas I'm interested in, and a series of materials that I know how to use. So I'm sure there's commonalities. I mean, some people, the kind of sense of the labyrinth, that you're sort of drawn into these places, right? In all of these things, that's definitely true. That sense of wonder, of kind of losing control almost, and losing touch and losing reference while you're in the space, definitely is true. It's not true in the U.S. Embassy, right? It's a different kind of building, right? But I think museums in particular, you're being asked to have this intense experience with these objects, right? And I think the more you lose yourself, or lose yourself in the space and the objects and the light, the better it is. But there's always, there's the hand of the artist, Lucy Ree, whoever it is. There's always the hand of the artist itself. I just think within our work, there's a pretty wide-ranging exploration, I hope. That's it? Oh, come on, yeah, at least one more, yeah. Make
You
it more
briefly touched on landscape and kind of
yeah,
touching landscape in your work, but not really knowing the plants.
yeah.
And I was just wondering if you could expound just on that connection between architecture and landscape.
Well, I think landscape is everything. If I briefly touched on it, I made a giant mistake. I don't know if you know, the first piece I did was the Maryhill Overlook. And the whole premise of that, it was part of something called the Sightings Project. I don't know if you... So I came back from Columbia, had no work. I was teaching at University of Oregon in Portland, and I came up with this idea. I actually taught it in a summer studio. I called it the Sightings Project, and it was to look at 5 different landscapes and and to try to find the architecture that would be derived from those landscapes. So the sightings, I got these people to give me 5 different sites, and this was a mistake I made, actually, I think. So, and I convinced this museum out in the Columbia Gorge, this crazy Mare Hill Museum, to give me a site, and then they wrote a grant and got highway interpretive funds. So it's a highway interpretive site, that building. State of Washington highway interpretive sites. But we had a site in the forest, we had a site in the suburbs, we had a site in the rural, and the city. And we had the city of Portland gave us these crazy leftover sites. And then I started getting buildings, and I quit doing these projects. That's the regret, in fact. You know, the idea of just investigating a site and that it's a generative, you know, it generates the architecture, materiality, the quality of the experience. We did there's sketches for the rural one where it was sort of cut into the earth and again kind of lifted. And we did studies about when you plant wheat and grass and things, how far the root systems go. So we went down, that was our reference point, and came back. So it's really more than landscape, it's site, right? I mean, I love the garden, so that's some subtext. But I grew up in amazing landscapes. And you know, there are a variety of landscapes in Oregon, from the beach to the desert, you know, to the mountains. And so I think it's always, I mean, the chance to do a building out here, oh my God, it'd be incredible. Incredible. But you'd have to wear red brick clothes or something, as far as I can tell. I was thinking it on the way in when I drove into campus, I was going, what the hell? It'd be like if we all had red masks on, and we all, you know, it's like, I don't think we're the same people or the same buildings, but we all have red masks. Somebody had an idea. Yeah. I like brick as much as the next person. Don't get me wrong, but using it as wallpaper, I don't know. I don't think it helps the cause of architecture. Just saying.
I really appreciate sharing the current work that's going on and under construction now, and the types of work that you're doing now is so different from when you started.
Yeah.
In terms of building types, budgets, client types.
Yeah.
You know, I can't help but think about the progression through education, through past experiences, through early projects to current things, and wonder where you want to go in the future, or, you know, a lot of this now, you're being expected to do certain types of things, I would think, and just kind of what thoughts you're having about things like that.
I've been thinking about this a lot, actually. We continue, you know, not tons, but like I said, we're in finals of a museum with those other, you know, well-known architects. So we continue to get invited to do interesting projects. But I've come to a place where I want to propose projects. And I'm not saying, you know, I want to make new institutions up and make new buildings to go with those institutions. Well, that might be really interesting. Now that I think about it. But no, projects that I want to do, like I haven't done this yet. I really want to do a chapel or a synagogue or, you know, church. Really desperately want to do one of those. Place of worship. That's definitely on my checklist. I am a huge soccer fan, and I want to do a soccer stadium. So I've approached some clubs with proposals, actually. You know, trying to solve their problems, a couple of them that I know well, and that's getting some traction. I approached a museum with an idea of a kind of addition. It's fun. I mean, you realize, certainly the way we look, and I think it's inherent in our training too, is that you can see things that other people can't. You know, you can see the problem, right? I think going back to your discussion of the therapy, right? You can see the problems sometimes, and they may think, you know, we have to build a new stadium in the suburbs or whatever, and you go, no, that'd be like the worst idea you've ever had. Right? But you have to sort of show them alternatives, you know. We have such power. I mean, you have to have projects that pay for this stuff, you know. But so I've started to just propose things to people, and having, so far some good luck, and it's empowering, because it's using architecture to solve a problem. Sounds really bad, but this rigorous process we go through of trying to understand, right? You realize you don't have to be, someone doesn't necessarily have to hire you to do that. If you're curious and you're interested and you have passion about it, right? I mean, the Sightings project was exactly the same thing, right? I didn't wait for a client, right? I cared deeply about the landscape, and I knew the landscape of the Pacific Northwest, so I just proposed those things. I approached that museum and said, I have this idea. So I think, there's a whole long conversation, if we were having the pizza party, but I didn't do the pizza party, did I? There's a long conversation about practice and forms of practice, I think, now, like no other time in the history of architecture. Where you used to have to sort of really, for my generation, Kahn died, like 7 of his employees moved and took over the University of Oregon in the 70s, right? And that's where a lot of my influences came from. But I think, and so I was taught that you needed to apprentice, you need to learn the discipline of architecture, kind of a 19th century. And then when you're truly ready, I didn't start my office till my late 30s, right? I think it's different now. There's so many forms of practice, right? If I had done those 5 siding projects, I'd be Olafur Eliasson today, Missed opportunity. He's a pretty interesting artist, by the way, who was trained as an architect, if you don't know his work. There's just so many different forms of practice today that to go and learn to do buildings, you need to know a lot to do these. We do all the drawings in-house with people that began working with me when they got out of school. So we've learned this on our own. I worked in other offices. They've kind of gone through this with me. But there's so many different ways to practice. I think if you have the ideas and the impetus or the patronage, you can work with people. I don't like that form of practice where you just do a groovy sketch and somebody else figures it out, which is the majority of buildings you see built today. Certainly the majority of people I compete with, that's how they work. And the buildings are crap. They're not going to last. And I'm not just talking about durability. They're not going to endure because the integrity of making isn't there. But anyway, we could go on that discussion forever. But I think people should feel courageous in what they do.
Talk some more about making too, because that was one of the things that struck me as I looked at process and also the products. There's larger form making or lighting or use issues, but they all are really embedded with incredible making going on there, understanding how buildings go together, pattern, detail, materials, studies that you did. I wound up looking at it and thinking about some of the work that Todd Williams and Billy Sin have done at times, or craftspeople are embedded in, and it's obviously special to you and something you can talk more about.
We're starting to lose people here. I'll wrap up with this one last thing. We get to build because we're architects. And so to me, the thinking has to go through everything to the end. It's one thought, down to the concrete detailing, the window detailing, the everything. Different than Todd and Billy, who are good friends of mine, they elevate the hand of the architect. Their buildings are much more about design than mine are, right? There's a lot of my buildings I try to suppress the design, but with exactly the same intention. They do beautiful detailing, right? Same intention, or same practice, I guess. Very, very different set of ideas about the role of that intention, if that makes any sense. Yeah. But we're architects. You have to build. That's what we do. So the idea that you would hand something off, you could understand why that would be anathema to me. You just can't. We can't even hire people if they come from a normal practice, Gensler, whatever, some corporate practice. That's a different profession than mine. we can't hire those people. They've learned a whole different way of doing things that is not what we do. You know, they make lots of money. That's the first thing they do. I wish we learned a little more of that part of it.
Well, thank you very much for coming, Brad.